It looks great.
Okay, thanks for your patience, everyone. Good to be here. And let's go ahead and get started. Chaz, you want to introduce yourself to get us rolling?
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here. Really excited to be able to provide this webinar to you all today. My name is Chaz Jones. I'm the interim climate program director for the affiliated tribes Northwest Indians and the senior tribal liaison for the Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center as well. Yeah, I'm coming to you from the traditional homelands of the Champanefu band of the Kalapuya, also recognized as Corvallis, Oregon. And yeah, I'm really excited about today's webinar.
And hey, everybody, I am Meade Crosby. I'm a senior scientist with the UW Climate Impacts Group and Deputy University Director of the Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center. I'm located in Seattle, Washington, Coast Salish land, and I've had the privilege to collaborate with many different tribes and tribal organizations in climate adaptation planning efforts over the years, including participating in grant writing to support that work and in providing resources to tribes to support their own grant writing for their climate work. And in my role here at the Northwest Climate Adaptation Science Center, I also review grant proposals and fund graduate and postdoctoral research to support climate adaptation research, and that is work that is often done in partnership with tribes.
Thank you. And I'll just mention at ATNI, the roles that I provide, or some of the services that I provide, are I help tribes achieve their climate-related priorities. And I tend to work with tribes in the Northwest, specifically Idaho, Washington, Oregon, some tribes, some ATNI tribes in Montana and Northern California. But yeah, so today I just wanted to kick us off with a summary of our webinar objectives. And in today's webinar, we often have this or we have in the past made this into a workshop. But today we have a webinar. We're going to try to make it as interactive as possible. But we're going to first familiarize all the participants with basic grant writing processes, and we're going to provide some resources that relate to climate-related funding that you may be able to identify to better fund your climate program. We're also going to try to support a shared learning and build community through this workshop or through this webinar with the interactive components as much as possible in this type of environment. But if you can, go ahead and download the worksheet, and we have a link in the chat. Those more recently that have jumped into the presentation may not have that link available at this point. So, but first we are going to, and if you don't mind introducing yourself in the chat box, mentioning who you are, what tribe you're with, or tribal organization, or organization more generally, and also what traditional lands you're coming from. That would be awesome. If you want to throw in the name of your favorite flower, that would be great too. Your favorite spring flower, mine is Trillium. I'll just mention that. But overall, we are going to be kind of giving you a 101 on grant writing. And in doing so, we're going to describe the process that, there's many processes or many paths you can take on writing a grant. But I'm going to describe, and Meade and I are going to talk about a process that we believe works well for us. And you can see if it works well for you as well. But first of all, you're going to need to define your project and to develop a funding strategy. And based upon the funding strategy for that project, you would be then building your team out. And that team will not only be your staff that are in-house, but potentially outside partners as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. We're also then going to summarize how you can find grant funding opportunities, and then briefly to talk about developing your budget, which is one of the first things that I do when I talk about a project. And then you're going to develop a rough timeline and then start to write your grant narrative before finishing up with your executive summary of your grant, and then asking for feedback where possible, and then ultimately submitting your grant. So that's just kind of a overview of what we're going to be talking about as we go through this presentation.
Okay, and I'm going to start us off with defining your project and building your team. Sorry, my camera's off, but I realized when I came back in, I'd have to restart again to use my camera. So I'll turn my camera on when we get to Q&A later. Okay, so. Oh, it is? I just can't see myself. Okay, awesome. I can see you. Oh, good. Okay, excellent. All right, so defining your project and building your team. So the first thing to think about when you're looking at pursuing funding is, what is the project that you want to fund? And the very most important first step is thinking about, what is the need? What is the need that your project will address? What is the problem your work is going to solve? What's the challenge it's going to address? And in this case, it's going to be something about climate change. More specifically, is it about preparing for climate change by conducting a vulnerability assessment? So looking at what climate risks are to the things of concern to the tribe. Or is it about completing an adaptation plan, thinking about what actions you could take to address actions? Or perhaps it's both of those things. Could folks on the line please mute? I'm getting some echo here. Thank you so much. Are you looking at implementing your adaptation plan? Are you actually going to be putting some boots on the ground or putting together new partnerships or doing something that implements your actions to address climate risks? And it sounds like that's a new area of funding for the BIA call this year, which is really exciting. This could be making changes to infrastructure or health systems or wildlife management, or all of the different sectors and areas of concern that might be addressed by your adaptation planning and resilience planning. Perhaps your project is looking to support climate mitigation. Perhaps it's about reducing greenhouse gases by studying options for installing renewable energy projects or even putting them in. So what's the need? What is it that you're going to do? Then you want to look at, what are the specific goals and objectives for that work? What specific activities and tasks are going to be completed to support your goals and objectives in service of this need? And what is it you're going to do to address the problem? And then finally, you want to think about what the desired outcomes of your work are. These can be really specific, concrete products, like, again, a vulnerability assessment or a climate adaptation plan, but there could also be some more intangible outcomes, like increasing capacity for addressing climate change, or putting together a stronger network or community for completing climate work. And then once you've thought about what it is you want to do, you can start thinking about how you want to get it funded. And one of the key questions for yourself when developing a funding strategy for the work you want to do is thinking about whether it's something that can be done all at once, or if it's something larger or something you don't fully have the capacity to do right now. Perhaps it's something that you could divide into a series of sequential fundable projects. So this work, again, it doesn't have to all be done or funded at once. You might have a longer term strategy for getting it done. And these sequential proposals and projects can build into larger projects over time. And starting small has benefits because it can help build funder confidence if you don't have a track record of doing climate work, or if your team doesn't have a track record of external funding at all. So successfully completing smaller projects can build your capacity, build your teams, while making funding sponsors more likely to fund larger projects over time. So thinking about, again, whether this is something you're trying to fund all at once, or whether you might break it down into smaller pieces to work on over time. Then you want to think about potential partners for this work. So who might you want or need to partner with to get it done? This might include thinking about, do you have all the necessary knowledge and expertise required? You may have this all in-house, but you may want to bring in external partners around areas of expertise around, for example, climate science or adaptation planning or renewable energy. You may want to partner with external organizations who can bring some of that expertise if you don't have it in-house or think you can build it in-house through capacity building projects. When you identify partners, you also want to think about their availability. Folks might have amazing expertise, they've worked great with others before, but maybe they're super busy. Are they going to have time to collaborate effectively on the project with you? Some partners are actually required to access certain kinds of funding. So there are certain grants that can only be accessed by a university or by a tribe or by a nonprofit or someone with a specific mission. And so thinking about if the work that you want to get done, maybe you're not eligible for funding for it on your own, but by partnering with another organization, you might be able to access that funding. And then also thinking about whether a particular funding opportunity requires letters of support. If that's true, you're going to want to be thinking about what individuals or organizations would be able to provide a letter for you. So who knows you, who knows your team or your tribe or organization, and is going to be able to speak to your ability to complete this project and also say why it's important. Okay, you've thought about what the problem is, what the need is, what you're going to do, how you're going to get it funded. You are moving on to thinking about actually applying for some funding. Now you want to think about who's going to help you write that grant with you. And I would recommend, if you can, avoiding doing it on your own, especially if it's a really big ask, and especially if it involves any partners, because pretty much anyone who's involved in a project that's going to be funded ideally will be involved in writing that grant. So these could be your colleagues, other tribal staff. This could be consultants or contractors that if you're bringing in outside expertise, then they could help write that grant with you. Or even if you're bringing in specifically people to help you write that grant, you could reach out to the tribal liaisons from any of the casks who can help you with your grant writing. If your tribe or your organization has a grant coordinator, then I highly recommend reaching out to them because A, they may be able to help you with the grant, but they also could be really important for letting you know if anyone else in the organization is also applying for that grant. So is there competition? If so, do you want to join forces and work on it together, or do you want to coordinate somehow so you're not competing with each other? So I recommend taking the time to reach out to the grant coordinator if there is one. Any other partners involved in the proposal, in the project, should be aware of what's going into the grant and hopefully help you write it so everyone knows what they're signing on to, and everyone is bought into the work. And then again, those writers of letters of support, if they are allowed or required, make sure that you're reaching out to them as early as you can to give them a heads up that this proposal is coming, what the deadline is. Anything you want them to talk about in that letter of support, it's very helpful if you suggest, give them a bulleted list of the things that you would encourage them to talk about or you would like to see, and then they can or cannot, if depending how they feel, use that information. But a lot of people appreciate that reminder of the things that you've done together that you would like to see in a letter from them. Chaz, pass it back to you.
Thank you, Mead. Those are some really good points. I think you covered a lot of really good stuff there. So now when you're developing your team, Mead mentioned the idea of potentially reaching out to grant writing consultants, which is always an opportunity that exists. It's something that could be done. And I'm just going to kind of talk about some of the benefits and some of the cons in doing so. Grant writers can certainly be a big asset, but they may not really have the background available to tell an effective story from your unique tribal perspective or from the perspective of your tribal organization. And that can really be, that unique tribal perspective, that context that would exist can be one of the strongest assets that a tribe or tribal organization has when applying for grant funding. So I think it's really important that you can have, if you're going to hire a consultant, make sure that they can really speak to that aspect of tribal identity, but all and tribal culture. But or that you provide a lot of feedback on the grant proposal before it gets submitted. And then you should also be aware that in not all cases can grant writing actually be a listed expense, an expense that can be covered in the grant. So that may just be an expense that you have to face externally, or your organization or your tribe actually has to pay for up front. But even when you write a grant with a grant writer, it's important to realize that you are responsible for the content that is included in that proposal. So it's really important that a tribe or a tribal organization reviews the proposal thoroughly and understands exactly what's being proposed. And it's also important that the tribe have the people, the systems, and the plan in place to carry it out. And in my experience, I'll just mention that in many cases, when outside consultants are hired to take on aspects of this type of work, in many cases, the tribe don't tend to embrace the product as much. So those are just kind of some of the cons and pros that I've seen. Next, you also have the opportunity to write grant proposals in-house. And there's certainly some big pluses to that, but also some negatives as well. Your staff is most familiar with your tribe or your tribal organization. And so they can really speak to the motivations, the importance, and the capacity that you have to do that work. And that's really important. It can be a lot of work to write a proposal for some of these major grant efforts, such as the Tribal Climate Resilience Program that we're here discussing today. But it can be a lot of work, but if you're writing it, you can really know that you can do the work and feel confident that you're going to be able to do that. But one opportunity you have is that you can take a team approach to the effort rather than tackling it all, putting it on one person, right? So if you can involve different people tackling different aspects of the project, that would be ideal. That way you can actually involve people with different types of expertise that can actually tackle the different aspects. In addition, you can make sure that the tasks that you identify would be appropriate for each individual person within the grant to tackle really matches their expertise and their skill sets. And you're also able to better provide accountability for your team and for the tribe in actually making sure that you can do what you propose that will be done. And so developing a proposal in-house can be a large investment of time and resources, but it can be very rewarding and allow you to be very successful in the effort. With that, we do have a poll available to you, and I'm going to drop a link in the chat that you can use to go straight to that poll, or you can use the prompt that is on the screen right now. But here we go. But basically, just wondering if you have had success in writing proposals in-house, working with consultants, neither, or possibly with both.
I'm going to stop sharing so I can go to the poll results real fast. people
Okay.
can see it. Oh, not that. I'll let people fill it out and then I'll pull this up.
Sure thing. Looks like there's a lot of folks who've been writing, have had success in-house. Not many people appear to be using grant writing consultants, which is useful information.
Do you want to pull up, do you want to share yours? Because actually I'm not seeing the results. Do you want to go ahead and share your slide or your screen?
And so looks like we have majority of folks using in-house or haven't had success writing proposals in-house, with a few having success with both consultants and in-house, and then also someone not having success at all. So probably a new grant writer. So with that, go ahead and share your screen again.
Y'all seen it?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So now, hopefully you all were able to access the worksheet in the chat and have been able to open it up on your computer or print it out. If you don't, you can also just grab a piece of paper or open a Word doc and take notes there. But we were hoping to give you some time to write down some of your thoughts as we work through this together. And the first thing that we wanted to give you some time to think about would be who would be on your team. So take a few minutes and use your worksheet to write down who you might include in your grant writing team. And feel free to take some time and answer some of the earlier questions about the work that you might propose to get done. And let's aim for about 5 minutes. And if you're done early, why don't you go give us a heads up in the chat and we can get moving sooner. But how about until 1:12? Also, if you have any questions for us as you work through this or want any feedback or anything like that, go ahead and put that in the chat. Or we're also a small group. If you just want to pipe up, we can also just discuss.
Just to kill some time, I'm looking up some of these flowers and I'm looking up the birth roots or trillium flower. Does that grow near you, Shaz?
Yeah, trillium, it grows in the Midwest and it grows here, but probably different species.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really pretty. And then let's see, Rachel's favorite flower is the lilacs. Those are pretty. I've never seen the skunk cabbage flower. I'm gonna look that up.
I had to Google it, but I realized I've seen it lots.
Yeah, probably. It's probably out there. Oh, that looks like a big one. Yeah, that's really pretty.
Yeah, lilacs are not necessarily the most beautiful flower, but they smell so good. So, and our neighbors have one, and it wafts over towards us in the spring, and I love it for about 2 weeks.
And if people want to enter in the chat, some of the people who you're identifying on your team are not individuals, but types of people, that would be great too.
And Chaz, I can't see the chat while I'm sharing my screen, so if you want to monitor that, that'd be awesome. Thank you.
There was one mention of biologists being included for each of the tribes. My cat appears concerned there's a plane going over, possibly in Seattle.
That was a float plane.
Looks like someone's completed the worksheet. Well, should we go ahead and get started again?
Yeah, does anyone need one more minute, or are folks ready to go?
The worksheet's really intended for your own use to help you kind of start to think about how the proposal process might apply in your specific scenario and situation. So
Okay.
we'll go ahead and get started. And so next we're going to be talking about identifying potential funding opportunities. And there's a lot of grants out there, and it can be really overwhelming to try to identify, well, what potential funding opportunity exists to actually tackle the project that I have in hand. And you probably have a list of, 5 or 6 different projects that you would love to find funding for, and you're always probably looking for funding opportunities to fund those projects. So how can you actually be more effective in identifying what those funding opportunities are? And the funding can come from a number of different sources, including federal agencies, state agencies, private foundations, nonprofits, collaborative groups, and more recently I've been seeing philanthropic organizations reaching out as well to tribes. And when a tribe when an organization or entity is trying to fund projects, we should realize that we are really helping them out. They're trying to fulfill their mission, but they don't have the time or the capacity to do all the work. And so by funding our programs, it's helping them to achieve their goals. And so when our project goals align with their mission goals or with the specific program goals that they're for the funding opportunity, that is benefiting them. And so we really, it's helpful for us to make sure that our efforts are in alignment, right? But first of all, in talking about the potential funding sources, I mentioned federal government often funds grants, and there's information available on grants.gov, and they can be pretty overwhelming, but you can get yourself on a search engine that will automatically email you when certain grant opportunities come available. State agencies are an opportunity, and there are ways to find out, get on lists and newsletters that will identify when different federal and state agencies are releasing their RFPs beyond just the email blast from the organization. Also nonprofits. But what I find is it's really helpful if you can get onto email lists that basically collate all the grant opportunities available to us. One of those that exists in the Northwest that is applicable around the nation as well is the University of Oregon's Tribal Climate Change Network and Funding Guide. And we'll talk about that a little bit more after I cover this slide, but that's one. They also have a newsletter that's really helpful. The BIA has a Tribal Resilience Program newsletter that is also very informative and provides information about different grant opportunities that are available and other opportunities. My organization, the Affiliated Tribes Northwest Indians, has a newsletter that we put out, but as do many of the, if not all of the other regional climate adaptation science centers. ITEP, the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals, has a newsletter that also is very helpful. And generally, it's just good to get yourself on these lists so that you are aware when things come out. And then private foundations as well. But first, we're going to go ahead and just kind of, if you want, you can feel free to go to the Tribal Climate Guide if you see that. But if you go to the next slide, Mead, I can just show you a screen grab from that. And if you go to this website, you can go to the, and maybe I'll put a link in the chat, but I put a link in the chat to the Tribal Climate Change Guide. If that first tab is funding, and you can scroll through there and identify different funding sources. And for me, this is the very first place I go to when a tribe says, hey, Chaz, I'm looking for funding for this particular project. Do you know of anything that's available? And I'm always keeping my eyes and ears open for different opportunities, and sometimes I'm familiar with, but I can't always remember the details. And this is the first place I go to look for it to see if Kathy Lynn, the program coordinator for this effort, actually has it cataloged. So this is really helpful. Next. And so what we're going to do is just take a few minutes to allow you to go to this website and to see if there is any particular funding opportunities that are available that are applicable to a project that you, or to an effort that you have in mind that will benefit you and your tribe. So we're just going to take until about 1:20 to let you go through this process. Just take a look at the website and see what you find. And if you find a good, you don't have to tell us about what your project is, but if you find something that looks applicable, feel free to type it in the chat and just let us know what you're thinking about. And Tim, you asked about social media postings. Some people are more or less involved in social media, and so, and some of us come and go. And I know historically I was more I would see things on social media. I don't see them as much these days, but it's certainly a way to reach certain audiences. And so, if you're connected with any of those agencies on social media, you can certainly see them in that area as well. But it's not my go-to, but it's just not where I find myself looking. But yeah, LinkedIn is a great idea for identifying efforts or proposal opportunities. Make note of that to the Tribal Climate Change or Tribal Climate Resilience Program. If we're not advertising on LinkedIn or dropping the opportunity on LinkedIn, then maybe there's an opportunity there. Thank you, Eric, for that. See that Eric's identifying. He identified an opportunity that he's found interesting. And also in the chat, I'm wondering if all of you are already familiar with this as a resource, or is this new to you? Feel free to let us know. Yeah, Great to see that this is a new resource, Martine. I'm happy to hear that. And yeah, the one nice thing about even seeing the grant opportunities that have had deadlines that pass are that often these opportunities come available every year. And so you then can, plan ahead for next year to see if you might be able to submit a grant to that effort, to that opportunity. Excellent. I'm seeing that there's a few people who weren't very familiar with it. Some people are. But with that, I appreciate that you're all taking a look and exploring it. I'm sure that that will be, people will find that beneficial in the future. And so can you go to the next slide, Mead? It's possible that Mead is getting her daughter situated after she got home from school.
Sorry about that. I'm back.
Please go to the next slide.
Yep.
I'll just mention a few upcoming funding opportunities that you may or may not have identified in that database. But the BIA Tribal Climate Resilience Program funding, it's coming up and is due on July 6th. And they're the ones who organize this webinar. EPA is having a Tribal Environmental Justice Small Grant opportunity for up to $100,000. That'll be available, and that's coming due on May 19th. There's a Community Renewable Energy Grant Program, also for efforts under $100,000. That'll be due June 10th. And a Renewable Advancing Community Energy Resilience funding opportunity that looked intriguing. It didn't have a deadline, but at least not one that I saw immediately. So there are some interesting things coming up that I found interesting that I know a number of the tribes that I work with are probably going to be interested in, and I can take this information and share it with them so that they can pursue these opportunities. With that, I'll pass it to Mead.
Thanks, Chaz. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So once you have your project idea, you've figured out who your team is, you've identified some funding opportunities, you need to decide whether you actually want to apply to the opportunity. And so a few things to consider would be, first of all, is it a good fit? So is your project idea, does it align with the requirements of the RFP, of the call for proposals? Is it something that they, generally speaking, would fund? Does it meet the criteria for the kind of work that they're looking to fund? Also, is your tribe or organization a good fit for the funding opportunity? Again, certain pots of money are directed towards specific kinds of organizations or entities. Do they fund tribes, or do they fund the kind of organization that you're applying from? Or if not, could you partner with someone who they do? The other big consideration is it worth the effort? And typically when I think about whether it's worth my time and energy to apply for something, the kinds of things I think about are, how much competition is there going to be? Is this something, this best case scenario, it's an invited proposal. It's not even an open competition. You have a relationship with a foundation, or a group comes to you, ask if you want to apply, or someone wants to contract with you to do something. There's no competition. That's great. But on the far extreme would be something like the National Science Foundation, which might have an incredibly low funding rate, maybe only, less than 10%. Something like that, where competition is really steep, that's something to consider. What is the likelihood that you're going to get funded? And then how much effort is it to apply? Something might be really competitive, but maybe it's really easy. You just fill out, one form and you're done, versus preparing some of these proposals can wind up being hundreds of pages for, if it's a large center grant, something like that. So on that scale of difficulty, is it really easy, like a phone call with somebody, or is it moderately difficult, like a 10-page proposal or a 25-page proposal, or are we talking a really heavy lift of, like a 25 or 30-page narrative and then budgets and then tons of subcontracts, like a very big lift. So thinking about that effort, how much time do you have and how much time will it take to prepare that grant? And then the final thing that I usually think about is how much return will there be on that investment? How large is the pot of money? Is it a pretty small grant, like $5,000 or $10,000, or is it more like the $50,000, $100,000 range, or is it $1 million or something larger, right? So you need to be weighing these, or I often weigh these things together when I think if it's super competitive and a huge lift and not a lot of money, I'm probably not going to apply. Whereas if it's something with a very large amount of money, even if it's a large effort, that could be high cost, high reward. Maybe you think about, are you competitive? Maybe you would apply. But the sweet spot on a lot of these is that it's moderately competitive. It's a lift to get it done, but you're going to get a pretty good return on it. So just thinking about weighing those things and what it's worth for you and your organization and the work that you want to get done, and considering all of these things together. And then, are you actually able to apply? Are there any internal tribal policies or policies within your organization that would prevent you from applying? Are there approvals needed? One of the most frustrating scenarios that happens with funding cycles is when windows for application are more narrow than processes that need to happen to approve proposals. Like, it might take 30 days to get it through council, but the RFP is only open for 3 weeks, and it's just physically going to be impossible. Fortunately, most organizations that fund tribes are aware of these, and they, to the best of their ability, make these windows wide enough to get through processes. But that's also something to consider. Are you like actually able to get this thing to the sponsor in time, and is it allowed? I've also been involved in, I've seen projects and been related to projects where someone applied but didn't let anybody know within the organization that they had applied for this, and it became a huge headache later because nobody knew really what to do with this grant that someone else had applied for, and they hadn't gone through processes. And so considering all of these things before you apply is really well worth your time to avoid headaches later, or potentially spending all that effort and then realizing that you're not going to make the deadline, or even if you got it, it wouldn't be allowable under policies. And then the final thing to consider, and there are many more considerations, but these are some of the most common, is, are you and the tribe or your organization ready to apply and to do the work? Thinking really critically about, is this something you can take on? Are you going to be successful? Both to actually complete a proposal, but then actually get the work done if you do get the money. And just thinking very carefully about that before committing to the process of proposal writing, and then especially to the actual work that you've proposed if you got funded. And with that, we have another poll. Oh no, we have first a moment for you to go back to your worksheet and think about funding sources that you identified through your search a moment ago, or from any of the ones that Chaz listed, and think now about whether they're a good fit for your project. Look at that sort of RFP, like proposal process. Is that something that's going to work for you and your tribe or your organization? So think about, I'll actually leave this slide up for you while you take 5 minutes to go ahead and write down in your worksheet anything, or considering these questions, whether you might be a good fit for some of the funding opportunities that you identified. And so we'll give you 5 minutes, and so to about 1:34.
Hey, Kim, or actually Eric, I'm sorry. Eric, I see your question for what is the general level for work needed to put in for the climate adaptation implementation opportunity on a scale of 1 to 10. And I know that we do have in the full solicitation all of the activity standards that are kind of outlined there. But we are still having a 6-page proposal limit, if that helps. So, I mean, considering that, as long as you get the right partnerships involved and I guess get a good group together, like Chaz and Mead were talking about a little bit earlier, I think that, it shouldn't be exceptional compared to the amount of effort that was put in the past for other planning categories. Although it's going to be a lot different than the planning categories, that 6-page limit just hopefully that puts it into perspective, like compared to other, construction grants and things. There's definitely going to be specifics and details that you will work out with the awarding official technical representative in the region if your project does get selected for award. But just for the initial proposal itself, I think that 6-page limit is kind of telling for the amount. It's not like you have to write a book. But hopefully that's helpful. But if you have more questions that are more specific in the solicitation, you can always ask us those too. And looks like Rachel's gonna chime in.
Yeah, that's perfect, Elisa. Yeah, take a look at the solicitation. That has all the criteria in there. And yeah, the one caveat, because I think you're asking about implementation in particular, if that does count as like construction and needs to go through a BIA a 638 construction contract, then that would require subpart J, which is part of the regs for Indian Self-Determination Education and Assistance Act, Public Law 93, 638. So that, like Elisa said, if your proposal is selected to move forward, you would work with the awarding official at the BIA region, and they would then kind of go down and work with you on developing the kind of more in-depth information that would be needed to fund a construction contract and fulfill all those requirements in subpart J. And that information, we have some links if you want to learn more about subpart J in the solicitation as well. But that wouldn't come into play until after the selection, and you would work with the awarding official. And some of those things might take a little more time to pull together to make sure the requirements and everything is sufficient. But for this step, just follow the criteria in the RFP and try to keep your page limit to 6 pages. I know that can be hard, but you can put information in the appendices if you think that there's more information there. So this stage of it shouldn't be too difficult, but just wanted to let you know if implementation project does include construction, we do have to pull the subpart G requirements in at the contracting stage, but not at this stage. Thanks. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. That was very helpful.
Thank you. We have a quick second poll here asking if you have had success identifying climate-related funding sources in the past, or successfully competing for any climate-related funding, or not yet, and this is your first time and it's a work in progress. And again, some of you already done this, thank you, but feel free to suggest any great funding sources or lessons learned in the chat box. So you can go to menti.com again and enter the code and fill out the second poll. And I'm going to pass this back to Chaz if he can pull up the results again, because I can't access them.
Sure thing. I will share as people start to go to the poll, which I just put in the chat. Are you able to see the, are you able to use the link to go to the poll?
Yeah. Oh, no, I see the last one. Why do I see the last one? Hold on. Yeah, sorry, I'm only seeing the last poll. Oh, go to slide. The presenter has changed slide. Now I see it. So up at the very top, there was a little prompt to go to the next slide, and then I found your poll.
Thank you. Now I'm seeing people come in answering. So it's looking like there's a number of people who have not written grants before or haven't been successful. But glad to have you here working on it, trying to get that first grant funded. That looks like some have been successful, and some have been able to identify appropriate funding sources as well. So
Yeah, and I see in the chat, Tim noting that it took 2 attempts to get funded for one of the BIA awards, and I'll just note, and Rachel, if you want to chime in on that too, but you know, in my own experience with getting funded and with funding, that is very common. So don't give up if you apply for something and don't get it, and if you get any kind of feedback that indicates that it was anywhere near the mark, it's worth applying again. There's a number of different reasons why you might be more successful the next time, but I think that's not at all uncommon to take a couple attempts to actually get funded for the same proposal.
Yeah, and we're happy to provide feedback. Since we get so many proposals, we provide feedback when we're asked, and we're happy to. So please feel free to reach out to us, the resilience.funding at BIA.gov, and we'll try to provide ways that you can strengthen your proposal based on the reviewer comments. If you're in the Northwest region, Chaz is also a great resource. He can, I hope I'm not volunteering you too much, Chaz, but he can help review proposals and give you feedback to strengthen it. Or if you're in a different region, we have Chaz has counterparts, liaisons in other regions as well.
And we'll provide their contact information towards the end of this presentation. And no, you are not overcommitting me. I'm more than happy to provide as much feedback as any tribe is interested in receiving on their proposals before they submit them. So thank you. And also, I did just start to type a response to Tim, but Tim had asked about the use of drones and finding an appropriate source for drone work. And I think that I'm going to address that here in just a little bit in my proposal or in my presentation, just about in how you frame your proposal. So I will cover that a little bit more. But I will mention that you can go to the next slide, responding to my RFP. So it's really important that when responding to a specific RFP that you do follow instructions. Like this is the biggest challenge, is like just following the instructions and doing what is required and asked of you, and providing everything that is requested. Because if you aren't following instructions and aren't providing things that are requested, the funding agency is tends to question, or it just doesn't present as well, and might question the ability to actually follow through on other things that you're promising. And then it's really important that your project description match the program needs. As I mentioned before, they all have their mission that they're trying to accomplish, and your project really needs to fit within that mission. The next slide. And so you can just go through, or go ahead and go through these, but the in getting at that, and this is where I'll address Tim's question about the drone work. You know, a drone could be used for so many different aspects of different types of projects. So if the idea is to fund a drone, it may be difficult to get a grant just to fund a drone if you don't have any other ideas associated with how you're going to use that drone. However, if you were looking to fund a drone because you wanted to assess, you know, the percentage of burned fir trees on a landscape versus unburned fir trees, and that would be an appropriate tool to allow you to do that, then you may be able to find a funding opportunity that would allow you to actually fund the project that you actually intend to use that drone for. So it's really important that you tailor your project to the RFP that you're applying to. I always discourage people from copying and pasting from one grant to another, thinking that that's going to be sufficient to get it funded. You really need to think about, what is the grant opportunity trying to fund? Are they hoping to fund, here, I'll just give you an example, carbon sequestration? Well, you may be able to frame a project that you're interested in carbon sequestration, but you also may be able to frame it as soil health, or frame it as an effort to increase water retention in soils. And so there's different ways of framing very similar projects, if not identical projects, but just framing it based upon the proposal opportunity that sits in front of you today. So I'll go ahead and, I know we're getting short on time, so I'll go ahead and jump forward. In addition, one of the first things that I do after doing all this prep work to find something to apply for is I first draft up a budget. How much money is this project going to cost me? Is it going to be in the realm of $25,000, or is it going to be $150,000, or is it going to cost me $1 million? It's important to at least get a rough estimate of what it's going to cost. But it's also, once you do that, it is important that you ask for what you're going to need to complete the work. It doesn't benefit you to ask for less than what it's actually going to take. So you can often shortchange yourself and ask for less, but that's not benefiting you if you can't actually finish the work. However, that being said, it is always easier to fund smaller requests than it is larger requests. So there's a balance there, but it's important not to ask for more than you can actually spend on the project. So I'll just leave it at that. And then the next thing I like to do is just to also pencil out, how would this project work? And by penciling out the timeline, for the proposed project, it allows me to think of the actual methods that I'm going to use to tackle the project. And when I'm thinking through those methods, it gives me a process that I can use, or a project map that I can use to actually go through it. And then that allows me to then follow up and write the narrative in a way that's more accurate. So those are a couple of things I'd like to do first a budget, and then a project timeline. Next.
So we have some time for you to work on your worksheet to think about the kind of funding strategy and timeline that your project might require. And here, thinking about, could you fund your project idea with a single grant? Or is it something that could be broken into several smaller projects and smaller grants? And what kind of timeline would you expect to be required? This is a little bit of a meatier question, and we wanted to make sure we had some time at the end for Q&A. And so I think we're going to let you work on this on your own as we're going through the slides, but not take time right now separately to do that, just because we want to make sure we leave time for questions at the end. But when we're done today, really try to work through that worksheet and think about these, and again, remembering, because sometimes you think about what it would take to actually get the thing done that you really want to do, and you're like, oh, it would take $1 million in 10 years, and I can't do that. And so just think about, can you break it down into smaller projects, into smaller grants, and get started that way? Okay, and now I'm gonna, in our last section here, talk about what's in a compelling proposal. So you have a great idea, you have who you want to be involved, you have some sources of funding identified, now you want to put a proposals together, you've got your budget and timeline. How do you actually get that over the finish line and funded? And the important thing here is that a good proposal tells a story. It's persuasive, and you want to get to the point where the sponsor, I remember a former colleague saying that when he's on funding panels, he wants to fund the projects. He gives the green light to the ones that he would pay out of pocket if he could. Like, he just wants that thing to get done. And so the way to get people to be invested in your work is to tell a good story about that work. So you don't want to launch right into the thing you're going to do. You want to explain why that thing really needs to be done. And so typically the arc that a proposal follows is by starting with the problem that has to be solved. So, and you start kind of broad, right? It's like a V. So you start with the big problem, and here it's probably climate change related, but more specific, it might be climate impacts on a particular species of concern, or a cultural resource, or infrastructure, health, whatever it is that your project is seeking to address. You want to start with the big problem and narrow into the specific thing that you're concerned about. And you want to talk briefly about what's already been done to address this problem, and where does that earlier work fall short. You don't have to ding other people's work. I actually prefer when people are generous about all the work. We're all working towards the same goals. You can speak generously about the work that you've done or others have done, and then say, and we really need to know this too, in order to address it properly. And so what you're doing here is demonstrating that you have a good sense of like what this issue is, what's been done, the context, so that the sponsor then knows why your proposed solution is important and needs to be done and novel. So you're providing that context and telling that story of, oh, here's this problem, here's what's been missing, here's how we're going to fill in what's been missing. So the key hook there is usually like, problem, here's what's been done, and yet, right? That and yet, that's like, it's total cliche, but that is the hook. And yet we have not seen, or we don't know, or nobody has done X, and this is what we're going to do. And so what your project is seeking to do to address that gap or need. We're going to complete a climate adaptation plan to identify strategies or actions for addressing climate risks. We're going to put in a solar array to help lower our greenhouse gas emissions and have energy independence, or whatever. You're getting to that thing that you're going to do, and then you're going to tell us how you're actually going to solve this problem. Like, what is your approach to meeting that need? So we're going to do a vulnerability assessment by bringing in these different tribal departments or staff or community members or external partners, whomever is going to be involved to do this work. And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to have these workshops. We're going to have a worksheet-based community approach, and then identify key risks or actions, or whatever you're going to do, you're going to describe it. Thinking very carefully about how much detail the funder needs to know to understand that you understand what you're doing and can follow through on it. Then you need to tell us something about, or the sponsor about, why you and your team are the right ones to do this. So, we're the right people to do this. We're able to do it. And you'll know that because we've successfully completed a vulnerability assessment, and so we're ready to do an adaptation plan, or we've done all of this monitoring, and so we know this is a problem, and we're ready to do this next step, or something about why you're the right ones to do it and why the sponsor should know you're going to succeed. And then how will you and the sponsor know that you've succeeded? So you want to tell something about what deliverables you might have, like we're going to produce this report, or we will have installed this solar array, or we will have convened these communities and to build capacity and held these workshops to train people. Like, what are the outcomes? And they could be tangible and, again, intangible. Like, we will have gathered this many people into this into build community of practice, or we'll do surveys and we'll see how people's knowledge has increased about preparing for climate change, or whatever it is. What are these metrics? How are you going to evaluate that you've been successful, so you know and the sponsor knows? And then finally, what's the broader contribution of the work? The work itself will have impact, but what is the broader impact for the community or for external partners? This could be as, does it offer a useful case study or an important piece of data for those far beyond the work itself? So something that kind of brings it all home about how this will have improved things. So this is kind of the arc. Here's the big problem. Here's what's been missing. And yet we don't yet know X, Y, Z. Here's what we're going to do about it. Here's how we're going to do it. We're the right ones to do it. Here's how we'll know we've been successful, and this is what it'll mean. To strengthen that story, make sure to throw in, back it up with what you've already done. If any funding before has supported work leading up to this, funders love leverage. They love knowing they didn't have to pay for all the work. And so any time that you have previous funding, tell them about it, tell them about the work that's been done. Make sure that the project you describe is actually achievable. So make sure you're providing enough detail, but not too much detail, but enough detail that the sponsor can see that this thing can get done. And then very careful, mirror the language and the style used in the RFP. So if they provide different headers for what needs to be included, you use those same headers. If they anything about, if they talk about tasks or activities, you use those words, tasks and activities, or objectives or goals, or whatever it is that they say they want to see, you put those same words in your proposal so that it's easy for them. They're reading a ton of proposals. It's much easier to follow if because they're evaluating against the RFP, mirror the RFP. And then show enthusiasm, because if you're not stoked about your project, it's going to be hard to get them stoked about your project. And again, they're reading a lot of proposals. Make it easy for them to read your proposal. Don't make it a slog. So as much as you can, really clear and concise language, keep it real clean, highlight any key points. And I mean, highlight them, like make them bold. I underline and bold key statements, like they're reading the whole intro. And so we are going to do XYZ, like bold that statement, like, oh, that's what they're going to do. It's real easy to find because they bolded it for me. And then if there's room for figures, if you have any complex concepts or, a plan for your workshops, or you're describing adaptation and, or whatever it is you're going to do, put a figure in there and it might make it a lot easier for them to follow if you have room. And then the very last step is typically some kind, if they ask for an abstract, if they ask for an executive summary, do that at the very end. Save it for the end because you've laid everything out, and now you're pulling out from what you've done, whatever they ask for, your project goals, budget, timeline, partners, expected benefits, that broader contribution to a broader audience. Save that for the end because otherwise it's going to change a lot. And you want to make sure that you're able to extract and hit those really key points because when the sponsor, they will read all of the proposals, and then they often have to go back and skim through things to figure out, as they're winnowing down, make it really easy for them to read that executive summary, because sometimes that's the thing that they might keep coming back to as they winnow down those proposals. As has been mentioned, if you need further assistance with your proposal writing, the CASC Tribal Liaisons are available to help you with that. Here they all are. If you want to take a screenshot right now, or I know this is being recorded and so you can get access to this later, but or you can Google the CASC network and you can look up your liaison, but they're there to assist tribes in securing climate funding and doing their climate work. So it's their job. They're happy to help you. So please do reach out to them. And just to wrap up, it's very important to recognize that writing a good grant is a skill. And it's a skill that can be learned and that you will get better at over time. If you've never successfully written a grant, one of the very best things you can do is ask a colleague if they have ever gotten a grant funded and look at that grant. So see if you can get someone to share some successful grants with you. It's so helpful to see what a successful grant looks like. As much as possible, don't go it alone. Asking for help will save you so much time and you're more likely to be successful. And remember, you don't have to fund it all at once. Consider a longer term funding strategy to break it into smaller pieces if it's really unwieldy and intimidating. And then finally, remember that ultimately you're trying to craft a compelling story. Think of the elements of storytelling as you craft your proposal. And make sure it's a story that's actually achievable. So thank you all so much. And we do have just a couple minutes for questions. I do want to leave you with one last request, which is if you would like a $20 gift card, Kim Yazzie, a grad student here at University of Washington, and with several other partners nationally are running a survey right now on what the quality of climate services that are being provided to tribes are and what the gaps and needs are to inform federal agencies and others who are providing climate services. And when I say climate services, what Chaz and I are doing right now, for example, this is a climate service where we're trying to offer support for tribes' climate programs by providing this workshop. It could be a climate service could be any data or technical support that's available to help with climate preparedness efforts, any workshops, any consulting groups that help universities, anything that helps support tribes or any other group in preparing for climate change. That's a climate service, and we want to make sure that these services are getting better. So if you email Kim, she'll send you a link to the survey and you'll get a $20 gift card for completing the survey. So thank you. I'll put that in the chat. And now we have time for questions. Oh, actually, we were right at 2. Maybe we don't.
Yeah, are there any questions? I don't know if we have time, but feel free to step up if you do.
Well, if you're not in the Northwest region, I did find, or I did put the link in the chat where you can find other liaison contacts. If there's a drop-down menu by region. If Chaz is not your liaison. And then, of course, you can email the resilience.funding email for more general questions too. But Chaz is your go-to guy in the Northwest region. Thanks. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.
Thanks, everybody.
And thanks again for your patience. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that I put the wrong link online. So I'm so sorry. I hope you have a good day.
Thank you.